Jeremy Konyndyk is president at Refugees International. He's a former official within the Obama administration working on humanitarian assistance and joins us now from Washington, D.C. Good to have you with us on the programme. I mean, you've come across situations like war and conflict. Aid is always required by innocent populations caught in the crossfire. Before we talk about Gaza, during your time in the Obama administration, what's the nearest example of sort of the genocide-like conditions we're seeing in Gaza that you had to experience and deal with?
Well, we faced conflict and violent obstruction of aid efforts in a range of places. We saw this with our partners in Syria. A lot of, I think, the battle damage patterns that are visible in Gaza today look a lot like what Assad did to Aleppo, for example. Similar tactics of obstructing aid in the war in Yemen. So there are absolutely precedents for what we're seeing. I think one of the things that's unique about Gaza is seeing the convergence of a lot of those different difficulties all coming together to make it one of the most challenging environments for delivering aid in recent memory.
I mean, you know how the system works from within. Conflict erupts, politicians react. When do they call the aid workers in for that meeting, or are you already in there listening to how the situation develops?
Well, there have been aid groups operating in Gaza for decades, and many of the aid organizations that have been working there have longstanding operations in Gaza and have been forced to significantly scale those back as a result of the difficulties of accessing the territory now during the conflict, and as a result of the well-documented obstruction by the Israeli military.
Just trying to get an idea of the behind-the-scenes chit-chat. I mean, obviously, you're not privy to what's going on right now, but we sort of want to try and get the methodology of how the system works. I mean, obviously, that there is an ongoing scenario in Gaza right now that we've been seeing for 7 months. I was wondering how far and how quickly US aid, for example, would get involved. Samantha Power heads that right now at the moment. I was wondering, where would she come into that conversation and how quickly or how soon has she been involved in that, do you think?
So the role that USAID would play within the US government deliberations is typically to provide some of the ground truth of conditions, to talk about they are a channel for relaying a lot of what they are hearing and seeing from their humanitarian partners. So, what is the ground truth that their partners are relaying about the difficulties they're facing, about the conditions that they are finding? There have been some indications. There was a leaked document a few weeks ago that USAID had sent forward to the State Department and the White House, in which they cataloged much of the obstruction that they've been seeing from the Israeli government. That was part of this process by the U.S. government of assessing whether Israel's conduct has been in line with international law. USAID's findings that were reported in that leaked document indicate that at least they don't see Israel's behavior as compliant with that. But ultimately, that decision is one for President Biden, and he will take USAID's advice in stride along with other parts of the government.
OK, so let's talk about what's going on with Rafah at the moment. We have now, it seems, the Israelis in charge of the border crossing. Karem Abu Salem is closed. This is now a dire situation, isn't it, for any aid agency, both within Gaza and outside of it, trying to work out how they can try and help in any shape or form?
Yeah, it's really tragic. Things had been improving very modestly since the strike on the World Central Kitchen convoy. The Israeli government had shown a bit more flexibility on allowing aid access to the north. There had been more food getting into the north. There had been slightly more aid getting into Gaza generally over the past few weeks. This obviously puts a very abrupt halt to almost all of that. It means things are now moving again in the wrong direction. Both the Kerem Shalom and the Rafah crossings have been closed for the last few days. And obviously, if there is a full offensive operation in Rafah, which the Israeli government has been promising for some time, that would risk the collapse of what remains of the famine relief operation.
No aid by land, but the US has invested in this pier at Ashdod, thinking that aid might be able to come in via the sea. But if Israel has a veto on what comes into the Gaza Strip, that's also a futile exercise as well, isn't it? Certainly for the US.
I wouldn't quite say futile, but definitely it falls short of what is needed. I mean, the Israeli inspection regime has been excessive and arbitrary and has blocked a lot of standard humanitarian, critically and standard humanitarian items from getting in. So, one example of that is water purification tabs. In every crisis where I've worked, where you have a crisis of access to clean water, which is very much the case in Gaza right now because so much of the water infrastructure has either been turned off or destroyed over the course of the war, you would then distribute water purification tablets to households so that they can take a bucket, take dirty water, and then use those tabs to purify it. Those tabs contain chlorine. That's a standard for purifying water. But because they contain chlorine, the Israeli government has blocked them in inspections. And it's kind of one small, but I think telling and indicative example of how excessive the inspections have been and how much that is hampering the aid effort.
Jeremy, it's really good to get your insight. Thank you very much for your perspective. Jeremy Konyndyk there from Refugees International joining us from Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.